Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to share with you today's episode because we don't know where it's going to go. But the question that we are exploring is, can one coaching conversation change a client's life? And we're covering that question because it's come up a couple of times over the last year where people have kind of inquired around that specifically, but also in broader conversations. So we thought it warranted a podcast episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a brief chat before. And my starting place on this is that, yes, one coaching conversation can change a client's life because all conversations are life-changing in some way. So every time an interaction happens, something changes. So having the conversation or not having the conversation, change has occurred. So I think from that angle, I'm like, absolutely, one conversation can change a client's life. Will it always be evident how that coaching conversation has changed a client's life? Not necessarily. But maybe it could also be dramatically evident how that coaching conversation has changed that client's life from the client's perspective or from the coach's perspective. And I think we've got to think about micro and macro. And sometimes we can come into coaching conversations expecting big aha moments and revelations. And I think many of the life-changing moments that occur in coaching are subtle. There's subtle shifts in mindsets or subtle shifts in the way that we see things that can build and build to have a dramatic impact on somebody's life. So I'm sitting in the yes camp. So how about you, Jo?
Yeah, and I think my initial answer was yes and no, into not sitting on the fence style, but an appreciation of the different possibilities. So from the yes perspective, and I know this to be true through the lens of clients having fed back to me. And as you were saying, it's not that a client would say in a session, that's life changing. Occasionally, yes, but also often later, many years later, sometimes clients coming back because they don't always, some changes need time to come evident. But I think it's the yes for me is it's not even a whole conversation necessarily. Sometimes it can be the impact of one thing said, and sometimes it's the thing that's said they've heard said to them several times previously, but there's something about that moment, the relationship that exists, that can be life changing. Sometimes I think it's not necessarily a moment that can be life changing, but it could be the energy, the overall feel of the coaching session that just shifts something in a client. It could be the client shares something with you and you respond in a different way to the way that other people have always responded to them sharing or being that way. And all of a sudden, that gives them the opportunity to experience themselves in a different way. I mean, there are so many different ways in which that interaction or experience in a coaching session can be life changing. And I think on the no side for me, it is if a client is not ready, willing, or able, then no, it's possible that it won't be life changing for them. Coaching isn't for everybody all of the time. And so, yes, it is possible that it won't be life changing. It doesn't mean it won't be valuable or useful. And again, there's choice for the client to make around how valuable, how useful. And yes, the way the client shows up will inevitably impact on that. So those were my initial thoughts about it. But what else is coming up for you, Zoe, when we're exploring this question of
Yeah.
can one coaching conversation be life changing?
I think as you were talking there about the different ways that something can be life-changing, I was reflecting on the relationship itself and how the experience of coaching can really change your life from a sense of recognizing what you need from relationships. So in a coaching relationship, obviously, the attention is all on you. The care and compassion is for your client's outcomes. The coach has no interest. It's detached from what the client chooses to do. And so the coach is entirely empowered within that coaching relationship to make choices. They get clarity of thought and make decisions. And there is a rare quality, I think, that is held in relationship between coach and coachee. And when you experience that, I think it can make you reevaluate the relationships that you're in elsewhere in your life. So it's not always a conversation that is life-changing, but the overall experience. So you might go through coaching and it be a gentle experience, and you come out and yes, you've put some actions in place to achieve some goals, but maybe it's been relatively I don't know, like easy, if you like, not too deep and not too challenging, but the experience of being heard, the experience of being witnessed, the experience of just having space to unfold your thoughts, that could be enough for that client to walk away and be like, right, I need to put some boundaries in place, or there are relationships in my life that aren't serving me in the way that I need to be served. So I'm going to be making some changes. So, it's not always the conversation, is it? I think sometimes it's the other stuff that takes place.
And what's popping into my mind is that, yes, one coaching conversation can be life-changing for the coach.
Yeah.
So if as a coach you enter into coaching conversation open-hearted, with a learner mindset yourself, in that equal synergistic kind of energy that you'll be trained to enter into the conversation with, then it may be that, as the client is sharing their model of the world, it shifts your model of the world. They're sharing perspectives or things that you haven't considered before, and that's life-changing for you. It may be that what you experience in terms of the impact for the client on the conversation is life-changing for you. You didn't realize that you had a particular talent, or there's so many ways it can be life-changing for the coach, and that the way that you show up and meet your client in relationship can be life-changing for both coach and client. And sometimes I think you can have those moments in a conversation with somebody else, whether it's in a coaching conversation or not, where you exchange that look and you both know that you are changed in that moment. And that's a very special human experience to be able to have.
I think coaching and why it is so life-changing is because, like, some things you can't unsee. So when you're in a coaching conversation, a great coach will be able to share observations around perhaps it's patterns that are emerging from behavior, or even language that they use. I remember once in a coaching conversation, my coach happened to mention that I use the word maybe a lot. I'd never noticed that about myself before. I was like, oh, maybe this and maybe that. And they're like, I'm just sharing an observation. You seem to use the word maybe a lot. Tell me more about that. And that just opened up a wonderful exploration around commitment and fear of failure and all sorts of, discoveries. But then I couldn't unsee that language. So every time I used that word maybe, I was able to go inside and be like, why am I using that word? Like, what is happening for me here? Is this something I'm afraid to commit to? Is this something that I want? Am I people pleasing? How can I be more assertive? So, it wasn't life-changing in the sense of like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing. It wasn't this big bang. It was I'm not going to be able to ever not see that now. Just a whole new level of awareness. And that's just one small slice of a coaching session. But I think the impact of all of those small slices can be very dramatic on somebody's life.
And that's another piece of the exploration around this question is, what does it mean for something to be life-changing?
Yeah.
You were just describing, like, and for you, those of you that are listening, like what does it mean to you? Do you think, it needs to be like, as you said, Zoe, big bang, like everything has changed in my world now, the way that I see it? Or is life changing maybe a new insight that's going to lead to you making one decision differently? And is life changing because you decide to move house? Is that life changing? Is it moving a job? That's life changing. Or is it you're going to show up in a relationship in a different way? So in order to answer that question or reflect on it, we need to consider what that means for us. When I think about has a coaching conversation been life-changing for me? Yes, I can wholeheartedly answer that yes, because I brought coaching to work in an organization where, as a human resources director, from that conversation or experience led me into coaching training to be a coach myself, which led me to start a business, leave my job, show up as a mum, as a, in all the roles of my life in a different way to the way that I would have shown up. It's given me freedom to work from home, or actually work from anywhere in the world that I would like to work, kind of, because I have a family too, so there are some restrictions there. It's given me financial independence. It has been totally life-changing for me.
It's the ripple effect in coaching, isn't it? So I remember a number of clients, but let's just take a general theme where you're working with a client and the coaching feels a bit like Groundhog Day, like you're not really getting anywhere. Yes, the coachee is making some progress, but it feels like perhaps they're not making as much progress as they would like, or even as the coach sometimes that I felt they wanted or were capable of making. And there's a whole other conversation we could have about that. But years later, those clients will come back through into my circle in some way, and they will share that coaching or those coaching conversations were the catalyst for dramatic life change for them, and their whole life as a consequence of that coaching has taken a different effect. And I think as the coach, you don't always get to see that. You don't always get to see the full impact of the work that you do together. I think that's great. I think that's, if you can stay with your client in the present moment and just trust in the process, trust that things are unfolding exactly as they need to for that client at exactly the right time for that client, then that the coaching is going to be life-changing for them in the way that it is meant to be for them, because the process works, like coaching works. It's like I said before, that you can't unsee things once you see things, and once that pebble's been thrown in, you can't stop the ripple effect. Like it happens. You just don't always get to see the whole thing.
You can also kind of use this question that we're exploring today in bringing it in to ask your client, like, what would need to happen in our conversation today in order for the conversation to be life-changing for you? That might just sort of blow the boundaries of the client's problem or current situation and stretch them into, wow, yeah, and what would that, as we were talking about earlier, like, what would that even mean for me, and what would I need to do? And it may be that that's not a place that they want to or can go to, in that moment, but it might still stretch them out, so I love kind of listening to the conversations around me, or that I'm exposed to, and with what I know about the client, to just experiment with them in the conversations to get them to think outside of their current thinking.
It's funny because as you say that, I was like, if somebody was to ask me in coaching right now, what would be life-changing for you? I think my reaction would be like, I don't want it to be life-changing. Like, it doesn't mean I want to stay the same, but it's what you were saying around, what are your beliefs around life-changing? It takes me to a place of, I want to enjoy presence. I don't want to be thinking of like big change. It's like, where does that question actually take you? Because I think fatigue can come from like thinking, oh, it's got to be life-changing. I need to change my life. That may not actually be the destination. Maybe life-changing isn't what the client wants to experience.
But that can give the client clarity, can't it?
Yeah.
Around, I definitely don't want that. Or what image is it that comes into your mind when you think about life changing? Because as you were saying, that in my mind is like an atom splitting, and that feels like that feels big, but a client might take that conversation or that question rather in a smaller way. Life changing right now for me would be saying no to X or this thing.
I think where it also takes me is like, let's unpick that. So you're coming to coaching with the premise of coaching being about future focus and change. And yet when I present the concept of life changing, you have a reaction to that. Like for me, that's data. Like even in myself, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like what's that about? So I think that can just be a really fascinating piece as well. And I also think where it takes me as a coach is like, it's really important you don't get hooked on coaching needing to be life changing.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were working for like a coaching agency, they introduced this rating scale so the client had to rate each session for the coach on a scale of like, I think it was 1 to 5, and 1 was like, I don't know, like pointless or something, or not very good. And 5 was life changing. And 4, I think, was something like average. It was like there was quite a gap between, it was average or it was life changing. And there was quite a lot of pressure I felt as the coach for each and every conversation to be life changing. And yet, as I started this conversation, my belief is that every coaching session is life changing in some way. It's just whether your client sees it or not. So
I think that's really interesting that you remember that rating, because I was like, oh yes, of course, yes, that happened. And I too remember thinking, oh my goodness, like that is huge, and so I'm never going to get rated that. And actually most conversations the clients rated as life-changing, which I sort of felt that was hard for me to compute actually, which, as you say, like is interesting in itself. And so it would have been useful to have had more information, actually, more of a breakdown around that. But what we're talking about is expectations here. Client expectations, coach expectations. And we've talked in a previous episode about like responsibility and pressure and how do you manage that. And we know that these things come up when we're supervising coaches as well. So we've taken various different routes to explore this question around can a coaching conversation be life-changing? Any final thoughts though before we...
I do actually. The one piece that came to mind is we've actually only talked about coaching from the perspective of being life-changing in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching done badly could be life-changing in a different way. It could be, I don't want to end on the low tone, but like the reason why we're so passionate around coach training and coach education is because the ethics are deeply important to us, and that relationship, so much trust is put into that coach and coachee relationship that coaches, it is important that we can honor that through being skilled and being ethical and coaching in a conscious way. It is possible that you could have an impact on somebody's life that isn't positive, and you may not always know that. I think that's the important thing. Like if your client doesn't experience the trust and safety in the relationship, your client may walk away with a less than positive experience and carry that with them, particularly if they felt undermined or disempowered in some way. So I think bringing it full circle, it's just to say, like, the reason we kind of are so passionate about coaching and we do this podcast and we offer the trainings that we do is because when you change your client's life, we want it to be because that is the change that they want to experience, not that you as the coach want to impart upon them and for you to be the amazing gifter of change. It's all about, what does your client want? What do they want to experience? And how do you simply facilitate that process for them? So I think, that's just something that kind of popped into my mind as we were wrapping up there.
And I'd like to say to you all, thank you for listening. If it's your first episode, hope you've enjoyed it. There's lots more to be able to tune into, go through the back catalogue. If you're a regular listener, and we know there are so many of you, thank you so much for listening and joining us each week. And if you've got 5 minutes, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave a review of the podcast. It really inspires Zoe and I to continue to make the podcast. So, thank you for listening.